Hey guys, Planet Everything here, and today we have a video on the Canon EOS R5. So currently I'm recording on the Canon EOS R5 with the 35 f1.4 Tamron autofocus lens, and that is the camera I've been recording on for the last week and a half. And this camera has shown me some very good sides and very difficult sides of recording in such high resolution for either extended or not extended periods of time. Let me show you a sample video I put together over the last week and a half of a bunch of different things I've been doing, and I will break down each and every clip in that video and try to make that my review, in-depth review of this camera. So, in the first set of videos, we see me jumping on a trampoline. Now, this is obviously utilizing the 4K 120 capabilities of this camera. Now, keep in mind, the entire video you just watched was shot on the Canon EOS R5 with a 35mm f1.4 lens on, and f1.4 was the f the entire time. My aperture never changed in any of those videos. Now, that being said, I believe the IAF, so, okay, this is an IAF. It is currently tracking my eyes, and it makes it so that you can seriously get down extremely fast f's or apertures. Now, that being said, So an I'm assuming anybody watching this video has a clue of what I'm talking about when I say an aperture, but for example, if I move this way or this way, or this way or this way, that camera has to focus very quickly because of the fact that it's an f1.4 lens. Something over here is not going to be in focus, and like if it was an f2 or no, not an f2, if it was like an f4 lens, this finger would still be somewhat in focus, but this hand is out of focus and it's about 6 inches from my face. So that is what I mean by having an IAF. Now, 4K 120 within the last couple of times I've been recording is a pain. It is a difficult thing to record in. Now, that being said, a lot of people aren't buying this camera for convenience sake. It's kind of obvious that a lot of things with this camera are a little bit quirky and somewhat difficult to work around. Now, once you work around, 4K 120 is literally the coolest thing I have ever seen on a camera, period. It is really neat to be able to slow down footage to the point where you don't even need stabilizing. I'm going to get back to that in a second, but keep that in mind. 4K 120 is a very high resolution, a way of keeping your audience focused and somewhat difficult for a camera to accomplish because it takes a CF Express card Type B to accomplish it. Now, you can't record 4K 120 or 8K footage onto an SD card, and I actually just found out that it won't let me record 4K 60 onto an SD card either, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that is what it's told me. Now, another thing with this storage situation, it's difficult to deal with that. The money aside, without saying, yeah, it can be $600 if you want a CFast card or a CF Express card for your Canon EOS R5. Yes, money aside, it is probably going to work pretty well if you get a $600 CF Express card. But the card that I got wasn't the name brand card. And that means even though I spent $120 on that card, it doesn't work super reliably with the Canon EOS R5. Now, there is a table on the Canon website that tells you all of the different cards and brands and capacities of which they have allowed 4K 120 and 8K RAW video on. Just so happens that off-brand cards really don't work when it comes to putting it into your camera and shooting video. So you have to kind of stick with SanDisk or Lexar. Lexar is a really good company to use for this because they haven't excluded any capacities with the CF Express cards that you can use. Now, moving on. I think personally that the 4K 120 capabilities of this camera are exquisite. They're really, really sharp. They're fast. The focus on this camera is fast enough. Well, the focus on the lens is fast enough, but the focusing abilities of the IAF is also very quick to be able to lock on to a moving figure going on a trampoline, doing a backflip and keeping me in focus. I believe I focused on my head in that flip, keeping me in focus while the camera and the subject is moving with an f1.4 lens on is not a super easy thing to do, but then again, it should be somewhat within the realm of this camera, and it's very much within the realm of this camera's capability for it to be doing something like that and tracking you fast enough. Now, moving on from that shot, we have a video of a kid putting water on his face. His name's Charlie. He's my friend. He came from Florida to visit me for a while. But this video, specifically, I also took in 4K 120. However, this one's a little bit different because it's a lot closer up, and it's not meant for an action shot. It's meant to show you a little bit closer of a shot with water dribbling down and the kind of lighting capabilities of this. Now, you might not know it, but it was like 10 o'clock at night when I filmed that. It was not bright outside whatsoever. The sun was already down. It was difficult for me to even see, and this camera conquered it. I put it on auto ISO just so that I could get some pretty easy shots in and just kind of test out really high ISO on this camera. And I don't know about you, but I could not tell if that was a high ISO video without something side by side. Just looking at that video, it looks very clean and crisp, and although it is like 10 o'clock at night, it still looks very sharp, and there's barely any, or I don't see any noise in the video. So that section, moving on, I did a backflip off a car. That's also an extremely low light situation. The digital focusing of the camera also held up quite well for the backflip. It was extremely dark outside, so it both bodes well for the ISO and the capability of the camera to track extremely well. And I would say the 4K 120 in that situation definitely surprised me, in that I didn't expect it to be able to capture that much light when it was filming 120 frames per second. Even with the maximum ISO, I didn't expect that without moving off of f1.4. So I am impressed. That's what I have to say about that. So the next clips are in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming, and I went there to film a couple of things. Firstly, testing out the 8K capabilities. Now, you see the 4K 120 all over this video because it is super fun to shoot in, and I honestly enjoyed it and had a lot of fun with that. But that aside, we're going to stop analyzing 4K 120. We might analyze a little bit of the clips in it, but I'm going to get to some more things first. So, the 8K clips. So, there are a couple of them. They are very strange clips to deal with, especially in Final Cut Pro. For some reason, my computer, or the Final Cut Pro application itself, was kind of difficult with these files. It's obvious that they're huge files for the amount of time they occupy. The amount of space is extremely disproportionate. It's huge. They're big files, and they're short clips. However, that being said, some of the footage that I got in this could be zoomed in extraordinarily and you still have very sharp looking video that I would think was captured with a zoom lens. Now, that's not completely true. It would be kind of obvious, but it is very good looking video, and if you were to want to like single out a detail in any of this 8K video, you could do that pretty easily without having a zoom lens and with just having a low aperture camera, so that you have everything in focus and the capability to just zoom in on the thing itself, and you'll probably have a pretty easy time finding and looking at a subject with pretty high resolution. 8K video itself has caused me some problems though. The camera itself said to me a few times that the card speed was a little too slow read and write. Now, that's not true. It's got a 1600 megabytes per second read-write speed. Don't know why it's doing that. It's definitely because of the name brandness of the card and the fact that Canon doesn't list it on their little chart on the internet. But that being said, they should really release some kind of software update where they have the capability to use off-brand cards, because, like it or not, I live in a small town, and I imagine a lot of other photographers and videographers do, and they don't want to have to order a CF Express card online when the camera store that they have near them doesn't have the one that they need to operate the camera. It's not a want, it's a need. You need a special brand of CF Express card to operate 4K 120 and 8K RAW video on this camera. Now, with all of this being said, we sum it up with a shaky clip. That is on purpose. This is an important clip. So, essentially in this frame you see the camera is wobbling a lot, but it's really not. It's not moving a whole lot. I was definitely a little bit exhausted when taking it. It was at the top of a mountain, but I was panning pretty slowly. It's a 35mm lens. It's not exactly zoomed out, but at the same time it's really shaky, I would say. Now, that is something I would say you have to take into consideration when looking into 8K RAW, because the fact that this camera, it has no ability to crop in an 8K video and stabilize it. Now, that's perfectly normal. Chances are, if you're buying this camera, you might actually have a gimbal already, but I would go out on a limb and say not using a gimbal with 8K RAW is a good way to just not have a video at the end of the time, because it's just going to be too shaky. Now, obviously, you can click a stabilization button in Final Cut Pro and wait a couple minutes, and it will stabilize it for you and leave you with a slightly lower resolution picture. But say you want the camera to do that for you, in this case, it won't for 8K RAW. Now, 4K 120, however, covers this quite well. I would say you don't need any stabilization for 4K 120 whatsoever, because slow motion itself builds in its own aspect of stabilization. Throughout the time I used this, whenever the camera got a little bit shaky or so, all I had to do was slow down the video, because once it was slowed down, there was no quick jerks or moving motions that could really be noticed by the viewer. It was simply flowy because the fact that the camera wasn't moving that fast in the slowed down time. Now, the final clip of this video is a Ford Raptor going up some rocks. Now, this is shot in 4K 120, and it's in a very light circumstance. It's actually as bright as it gets, probably, and it's in the desert, essentially. It's in Moab, Utah, and you do not have a way to make it a little less bright. I had my shutter speed for the video all the way to the top. No faster. It wasn't possible. And my F was at 1.4 because I didn't want to change it. My ISO was at 100. It was still overexposed, and there's nothing I can do about that. That's not really something I can complain about, though. If I wanted to, I could have changed my aperture. I didn't, because I figured I could just do stuff in post about it, but it's really fine. I think it still handled it pretty well. Now, as far as the overheating goes, overheating is not a problem I ran into in the camera. It's actually something I ran into with a card, because even though this card is an off-brand card, the problem that prevented it from working super well wasn't the fact that the read and write speeds were slow. It was the fact that every time I pulled the card out of the camera, it was hot. It was not warm, it was hot. The card itself was so warm that I just had to kind of keep it out of the camera for a little bit, and then once I put it back in, it usually worked. The camera itself never has told me, at least to this point, that the temperature's too high within the camera. It says that the camera's card is too low, it's not working. But the temperature within the camera has not been a problem I have encountered yet. And I have recorded in extremely hot temperatures. It was 106 degrees in Moab, and the only problem I came across was slow read and write speeds with the card that I was using. That being said, it's definitely a thing. You just need to be able to record for long enough, and the card I was using couldn't. That could be something you guys have problems with. However, for me, I don't even have the storage to video for 30 minutes of 8K RAW. Like, I don't want to spend $30 on storage for one video. Like, that's just not worth it. But yeah, that's my review of this camera. As far as pictures go, I think it's a whole different story, to be honest. I think this camera has some serious potential. I think I've taken some of the coolest pictures of my life with this camera, and I've had it for about a week and a half. I will show you all of those at the end, and I'm probably going to do another review specifically for still images. However, that is all I have time for today. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and also please share with your friends because, you know, sharing is caring.